Announcing it for a while. We've had some dates out for quite a while, but these are on the back table back there. You can pick them up. It's with Warren Berkeley. It is Joyful Living Through Christ Who Strengthens Us. It'll be some studies in Philippians, April 30th, Sunday, April 30th, through Wednesday, May 3rd. And so you can see the lessons, you can see what we're going to do. And one of the significant things about it is we're going to have a Sunday evening session. Actually, we'll meet at 6:30 for singing Sunday evening, and then we'll have a session, preaching session after that. So you can grab this to remind yourself, take a picture of it, whatever suits you. Since it's now April, we'll start announcing that regularly. Regarding Daniel, last week, 2 weeks ago, thanks for Brother Bailey filling in last week while we were gone. 2 weeks ago, we kind of ended our discussion of Daniel chapter 6 with two main points that we wanted to make as we drew that chapter to a close. And one was that God is not constrained by the laws that He makes for us. That's one of those principles that we just need to keep in mind. We need to always understand that God is not bound by the laws He creates for us. He lives outside of that. Just like He's not bound by gravity, He's not bound by time. We should find no surprise in the fact that God is not bound by the laws that He creates for us. And once we get that in our minds, we can see Him more clearly as the sovereign God that He is. Now, that doesn't mean He doesn't act consistently with who He is. Obviously, He does that, but He's not like us. And when we get that, then we see Him more clearly. It's really good for us to do that, to understand that. Then the other thing that we talked about that we'll pick up on tonight is this business of unintended consequences. We have two of those things going on in this story of Daniel in the lion's den. The first one would be with the king, right? The king signs a proclamation that ends up putting Daniel in the lion's den. Is that what he wanted? Is that what he intended? Not at all. It's not what he wanted to do. The other one, the second one, is kind of one that we overlook sometimes, and that is after Daniel comes out of the lion's den, who suffers from unintended consequences then? The ones that did the stuff to begin with to put Daniel in the lion's den. Yeah, they find themselves in the lion's den. So that gave us a really good opportunity to bring up the idea of unintended consequences, because that's something that we have to deal with. And listen to me now, especially conservative Christians have to deal with that concept. We have to wrestle with that, because we are by nature, as we strive to do God's will, we are sometimes tempted to kind of try to do better than God did. Try to say, okay, this is what God said, but we're going to do that. We're going to make it even better than that. Think Matthew chapter 23, where the Pharisees come up with their own rules, the rabbinical traditions, we call them. So the Pharisees have these rules that they're going to put in place to make religion better. They looked at what God did and said, we can do better than that. We can go a step further than that. We can make it even better. And every time we do that, a couple of things happen. One is we don't acknowledge who God is. We put ourselves in His place. That's just bad. And then the other one is unintended consequences. We create problems for ourselves. So I want you to think through that concept, and I want you to kind of go with me on just a little bit of a thought process there. Let's say that we are examining what we do as a church family, and we want to do it. We want to do it right. We want to be better. We want to continue to get better in our service to God, our public service to God. And so we come up with a rule, if you will, a new policy that says, okay, in order to be sure that everything that happens perfectly and is just what we want, we're going to say, okay, a couple of things. We're going to say that, folks under the age of, let's just say 21, because that's a good, they're not going to participate in our public services, because, our public services, that's important. We're going to make that rule, okay, because we want to make things as good as they can be. What's the intention? To make things as good as they can be. What are some unintended consequences from that? No growth? What else? That's a big one. What else? Discouragement. Yeah. Are we going to use the people that are capable of being used, both in here and in classrooms? Or are we going to disenfranchise some people, to use a word? Yes, we are. We're going to make some mistakes by doing that. Our intention is to make things good. But the unintended consequences actually do more damage. We have to come to terms with that, because there are times when that sort of thing is really unavoidable. COVID was one of those times, not related to the church, but just generally. There are some students in schools all over this country who are behind on math and reading, particularly math and reading, because of the things that happened and the rules that were made during all of that. And a lot of those students, listen, they'll never catch up. They will never get to where they would have gotten because of what we did as a nation, as a country, because of what we did. But felt like we had to do something, and so we did something. We find ourselves sometimes in situations where we just can't win and it's going to be hard, but we also find ourselves in situations where if we look down the road, we would see some unintended consequences. We would understand that things could go wrong and we need to be very careful, and that is a hard thing to manage when you're really trying to do things better. So, one other thing, and then I'll let you talk about it if you have anything you want to say. Let's just say, for example, that the state of Arkansas looks at traffic fatalities and says it's unacceptable, and it is, by the way. And we've got to do something about traffic fatalities. And so what we're going to do is we're going to put into place a new policy in the state of Arkansas that says nobody can drive over 10 miles an hour. You can't do it. You cannot go over 10 miles an hour. If you go over 10 miles an hour, you lose your license for a year. You cannot go over 10 miles an hour. Would that reduce traffic fatalities? Probably so. I think you could probably extrapolate some data that says it's going to really reduce traffic fatalities. Significantly reduce traffic fatalities. Are there any downsides to that? Is there any problem with that? Yeah, road rage is going to become a real issue beyond what it already is. Yeah, just think for a minute. Think about it taking 18 hours to go from here to Little Rock. I'll tell you one thing that would happen. Regional airlines would really start booming. Folks would start flying from Greenwood to Fort Smith. I mean, things would really get going in the airline industry. Another thing that would happen is the whole housing market would change, because folks wouldn't live in, well, Greenwood and work in Fort Smith. How far is it to, who works in Fort Smith? Anybody go to Fort Smith on a regular basis? All right. So how far is it, Daniel, to your place, ballpark? How many miles? 8? 9? Say 15 miles. 10 miles an hour. It's going to take a long time. So it changes the housing market. Everything changes. The intention is to be better in one particular area, but the result of the decision is just disastrous. We have to think about that sort of thing when we decide how we're going to do things spiritually and within our families and collectively. And everybody has to go through that process. What we want are decisions that are best and have minimal downsides. Now, we know every decision has a potential downside or more. We know that. But we want to manage that and try to look down the road and not have unforeseen consequences. And that's one of the lessons that really jumps out at me here, because the king, the guy that's running the show, isn't thinking down the road. He's thinking short term. He's thinking what's good for me. He's thinking, ooh, people will pay homage to me. People will be thinking about me. I like it, let's do it. And then he is so sad when it happens. The other group is thinking, watch this. We're going to get rid of this guy that's been bothering us. We're going to go up in the kingdom. Everything's going to be great. It's going to be perfect. I wonder if any one of them said in that process, wait a minute, what if this backfires? I wonder if anybody said that. Would you have said that? You would have probably said, wait, we can't do that. That's not right. But you know how that goes. Sometimes something sounds really good and you get on board with it and we don't think it through. We get to learn that lesson here in Daniel chapter 6, and it's a really valuable lesson for us to consider. Anything you have to say about that at all? Any comment you want to add? Anybody want to give me an example of unintended consequences that you've experienced? Anything you want to say?
Well, that's something we battle, Todd, as elders in regards to matters of judgment. Not necessarily, we don't battle with things that we deal with in regards to scriptural integrity of what we do, but we battle some things in regards to the time we worship, etc. There's always pros and cons to everything that we consider.
Yeah, that's how that goes. Yeah, everybody has, and the fact that everybody's cognizant of those kinds of things is what makes it work, right? Because we're all aware that any decision any of us make in trying to improve things might have a downside that has to be managed, that has to be dealt with, that we have to work out. And so we all understand that, and that's what makes it work. That's what makes it possible to get things done. Joey, do you ever, when you were involved in law practice, criminal defense, you ever have multiple options of ways you could go and you have to try to figure out which one's best and they all have a downside?
Many times I told the client, you've got two options. You just don't like either one of them.
Yeah, they're both really bad. But we have to pick.
You either go to trial or you take this deal they're offering, and you don't like they wanted the third option.
Yeah. That's life. And I just want us to think about that. That's just what life consists of. And you know that because you have to deal with that in your own life. But when you think about that in our collective work together, it helps us be more patient with one another, and it helps us get things moving in the direction they need to move in, even though it doesn't suit one of us perfectly, or even though it does cause a little bit of a difficulty for a certain group or something like that. It's difficult to do one thing that suits everybody. And we get to think about that out of this story because it's such a glaring unintended consequence story. Okay, anything else about that before we move on? Anything else? Okay, so go back in your mind, Daniel 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You get to pick anything there that you want to just make a quick point about, anything you want to revisit, anything you think is worthy of mentioning one more time. Like I say, Lord willing, we'll get into chapter 7 next week. That will change, kind of change our story a little bit. Everything will get a little bit different. So this is our time to review anything you want to bring out or you think bears repeating or emphasizing again. Yes, sir.
To me, one of the most interesting things that are there is when the Jewish young man said, okay, we have this choice and all this kind of stuff, but it really, they tell me, it just really doesn't make any difference what happens here. What we're going to do is do what's right.
You know, what Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego say and the attitude they have about it is remarkable. The way it's recorded is remarkable. You know, sometimes the Scripture builds to a point, and sometimes Scripture just states the narrative of what occurred, and that's kind of what you have here. In fact, you don't have a lot of judgment, if you will, in the story of Daniel up to chapter 6. You don't have commentary on this was good or this was bad. You just have this is what happened. And so at the end of or in the middle of chapter 3, Nebuchadnezzar says in verse 15, what God is there who can deliver you out of my hand? And they don't even answer that question. That's not the question they're interested in answering. What they say is we don't need to respond to that. Because no matter what happens, we're just not going to bow down and worship. We're not going to do it. And how at that young age they got that kind of conviction is really interesting to me. A lot of folks will say, well, they must have gotten that from their family. Maybe so. Maybe so. They must have gotten that from the society in which they were raised. Maybe so. One thing we do know is they had it. And they had it when they needed it. Can you look back in your life at any particular event and wish you would have taken a stronger stand spiritually on any particular thing? Can you look back and say, I wish I would have done a better job on that thing? Not generally. Everybody would like to have done better generally. A specific incident. These guys here are just shining lights in that. Verse 18, but even if he does not, it doesn't matter how it works out. I love that. What else?
Then tied to that one, since we're on that chapter, we see in Nebuchadnezzar a maxim that has a broader truth that's overarching. Anger and rage never accomplishes much good. And that's the way he responds to their, I think he said he was enraged. But I don't know that I've ever accomplished any good when I was mad.
You can accomplish a lot, but it's usually not good. Yeah. Anger, does anger have its place, by the way? Yes, thank you for that. Anger has its place. Does it have to be measured and controlled to be effective? Yes. Who has mastered that in every case? Anybody want to? Nobody? Good. That would be good. It's a challenge. It's a challenge. And one of the things anger does, and we haven't talked about this lately, one of the things anger does is elevate self. In other words, the thing about which I become the most angry is the thing about which I'm absolutely right and everybody else is not, or the people that I'm opposed to are not. And what it does is it creates a false view of self. And the more we do that, the more that becomes a habit, and the quicker we are to do that, and so on. And that's where Nebuchadnezzar was. What you see here with him in chapter 3 is not kind of a one-off event. We've seen him get angry several times. In fact, in the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, the text literally says his facial expression was altered. Remember that? He got so enraged that he couldn't control even his face. And it's probably that he had a little bit of a, "are you kidding me" look on his face. Like, I can't believe someone would do this. But his anger problem was a problem. And do you think that may be part of what the Lord's dealing with here? Because the Lord is trying to impress upon Nebuchadnezzar some lessons, right? Maybe he's trying to get him to see himself more clearly. The only way he can see himself more clearly is to see what? What does he ultimately end up doing? Through the whole process of his life that's recorded here, he ends up seeing God more clearly, and that helps him put himself where he needs to be. We say from time to time about the matter of forgiveness, we need to be quick to forgive because we are also those who have offended, right? Anyone among us who has never offended someone else or done wrong to someone else, I suppose, has a little more latitude in being offended and being angry and all of that. But I'm not in that category because I've offended just as much or more than I've been offended, and we know how that works. The Lord's wrath is righteous. That's the difference. He's always righteous. I am not. And so on any point wherein I may be correct today, I still need to settle down because yesterday I wasn't. And that's just how you and I exist. And so that helps to temper us. It helps us to have patience and compassion and all of that. Good point about Nebuchadnezzar. He is some kind of a fellow. I'll always remember the Bible stories when I was younger about how he's going to tear your arms off and burn your house down. That's just who Nebuchadnezzar is. It doesn't matter what's going on. That's what we're going to do. And I don't like that. That makes me nervous. Yes, sir. So, it's very similar to, okay, very good, very similar. And one other thing it reminds me of, Brother Owen, that just kind of jumps out to me is it makes me think about how Satan must have felt and thought, we can use that terminology, as Jesus is there dying on the cross. As he has succeeded in getting the people stirred up and having them kill Jesus. It's one of those situations where he must have been thinking to himself exactly what these Chaldeans were thinking as Daniel is being thrown into the lion's den. We got them now. Everything's going to work out. Our plan worked. We're good to go. And then they both realize, wait a minute, it's backfired. I think Haman was hung on the same platform, gallows, that he had prepared for Mordecai. So, yeah, that's how that works. But I don't think there's a better example of that than Satan himself, who at the crucifixion of Jesus is probably thinking, I've done it, and then he realizes, wait a minute, I haven't done it. In fact, he has now, I've lost. He has triumphed over me. And that's the point the Hebrew writer makes in chapter 2. It's such a lovely point where the Hebrew writer says down around verse 14, he rendered powerless him who had the power over us through death. Well, Satan is the one who had the power over us through death, but Jesus rendered Satan powerless. And so death isn't your enemy anymore. We talk about that. Man, that's a hard thing for us to grasp. Death isn't your enemy anymore. It isn't the thing we fear anymore because of what Jesus did. But Satan never saw that coming. Had he seen it coming, he would have changed his tactic because that just took everything he had. So I like that one. That's a real good one. What else? Yes, ma'am.
In terms of leadership, there's the leadership from a place of fear and leadership from a place of love. And you see that for those who did fear, like Nebuchadnezzar, and then you have Daniel who's there through it out at all. And there's a longevity there to him leading from a position of God
Would you call Daniel a leader? Absolutely. Do you have any examples of Daniel going out and making these great big proclamations to people and telling everybody what to do and pointing here and there? Now, we know he probably did some of that in his work, but Daniel's leadership, to Miranda's point, was quiet leadership and effective leadership. Think about the leadership that just resides in everybody knowing that you're going to go pray to God. That's what you're known for. I suppose there's some people that aren't led by that, but I guarantee you there's a whole lot that are. And so those kinds of things that you put into place in your life that are evident in our church family, that's leadership. And that's why sometimes we say in sermons, when we talk about leadership in a local church, don't think elders and deacons and preacher and all that. Don't think that. What we're talking about is people, Christians, who are striving to live as Christians. There is no better leadership and effective leadership than that. And that's how we need to think about ourselves, that we're striving to be like Daniel, to just do his will, do the Lord's will. And that affects everybody around us, and that's just awesome leadership. Yeah, Miranda, great point. Contrast that with the I'm going to burn your house down style. Which one would you prefer to be led by? That's not even a question, is it? Yes, ma'am.
Verse 16 to me is the telling verse in chapter 6.
Chapter 6.
When the king says, "Your God whom you serve continually, he will deliver you."
Yeah.
So he knew enough about Daniel and the character of Daniel and who Daniel served to know that he would be delivered.
Isn't that wonderful? And I struggle with these kings who are, well, they're idolatrous. We can try to be nice about that, but they're just idolatrous. But they do have enough sense about them to recognize that amongst all the idols and gods that exist, Daniel's God. He's got it going on. And that's really what the Lord's trying to get, especially Nebuchadnezzar, to see. But here, Darius just knows. He just knows. That's leadership. That's, well, we might say today, that's just a Christian being a Christian. That's a follower of God being a follower of God. Don't downplay that in your life. Don't look at your life and say, well, I don't do much. If you do that, you're doing a whole big bunch, and it affects the people around you in ways that we probably don't really know. What else?
Touching on what those two have said, Daniel in 6:10 goes to pray publicly. That was the thing that would have kept him from praying private. But that decree affected the entire Jewish community. She mentioned leadership. We don't know a whole lot about the Jews in Babylon. We can read in Ezekiel some things.
Right.
But you just got to look. We got two examples in chapter 2 and chapter 6 of people standing up to the decrees. How many Jews didn't?
The Jews struggled in captivity. We know that. But to your point, Daniel could probably have closed the window and done his business and said, I have done my business. I did what I'm supposed to do. It may be that the window was left open because people needed to see Daniel doing what Daniel needed to do. Right. Yeah, that's one of the, when you look back, whatever period of time you look back over, that's one of the things that kind of stands out, is did we provide for those around us in any certain environment, did we provide the leadership necessary or needful at the time? And I can tell you, I can look back in a not too distant back during the time of COVID and say, oh, there was a lot of room for improvement there. There was a lot of room to do better there. And most folks could, I guess, but that's one of those things that kind of sets, a mark and a conviction that says, okay, whatever mistake was made that way, we won't make that one again because we've learned. Daniel seems to be well beyond that. Now, Daniel's an older fellow at this time, right? When we're in chapter 6, he's probably in his upper 70s, 80s, somewhere around in there. He has seen a whole bunch, and he has accomplished a whole bunch by God's help. And it may also be that when he goes there in verse 10 to just go pray, it may be that he looks around him and says, I really don't care. I mean, much like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in chapter 3, if God's going to deliver me, he's going to deliver me. But my faith and trust is in God anyway, so I'm just going to do what I need to do and do what I think helps the others. And that's pretty good. What gets in our way a lot of times? Well, a lot of times we're worried about prolonging or preserving our lives. I get that. I do. But one of the things I like to say is in 50 or 100 years, that won't be our concern. In 100 years, I will not be thinking about how I can get in shape to preserve my life. That is not what will be on my mind. And the more we think that way, the less important the things of this world become, even preservation of life today. It's all going to change anyway. And being on the right side when it changes is the thing. And I guess we see in Daniel such a clear distinction between you get to pick. In our world today, the lines usually aren't this clear. Usually we have to work harder to see distinction between is this a choice for the future, for eternity, or is this a choice for now? It's a little bit harder for us sometimes. But I would prefer the life we have than the life Daniel had. So there you go. What else? Yes, sir.
Over and over again, regardless of who's in control, whether it's the Babylonians or the Medes and the Persians, we see that Acts 17:26 thing play out over and over again.
Okay.
Pointing the times and the
Yep.
boundaries. It's kind of like, to me, it's like Job. Initially, we look at Job and we think suffering. We look at Daniel and we look at courage, strength of faith. But I think that common thread is God is in control,
Yep.
constantly. And then how you respond to who's in control is preeminently important.
That's the thing that matters for all eternity. Yeah. Job is really not about suffering. Job uses suffering to make the point that you need to see God for who God is. That's what he says at the end. Remember that? Job says, I thought I knew who you were, but now I see you clearly. And that's the whole point of the whole book. The suffering happens so he can see God clearly. You can take a little mini look at that when Nebuchadnezzar is sent out into the field to live as a wild animal. Okay? You're going to get a better look at who God is and who you aren't. And that's really helpful for us because then we can get things together and we can serve appropriately. If I'm conflicted about who I'm serving or who really is in control, it's not going to work out well. What else? We have 4.5 minutes. Anybody have anything else? Out of Daniel 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yes, sir?
A good reputation is something you're supposed to have. Now, it's real easy to say, some criticism depending on who I was not seeing advice. Daniel had a great reputation. It carried over from his Babylonian captivity to the Medo-Persians. And Jeremiah, we saw that when Jerusalem was overrun, Nebuchadnezzar to take care of it.
Did everybody like him?
No,
Okay.
no, I don't know about Daniel, but Jeremiah.
Did everybody like Daniel?
No,
Not everybody.
right. But he didn't accept criticism from them. And I think we need to remember that. We need to keep a good reputation, but don't let critics keep us from serving.
Very good point. I've often wondered what the relationship was like between Daniel and all those other Chaldeans that were right under him. Because he has risen to the top, and you've got a whole bunch of local folks right under you. What was that relationship? And we saw a few of them, not all of them, but a few of them try to get him thrown into the lion's den. I wonder what the relationship was like with the others. And more than likely, we can surmise that most of them recognize the same thing the king recognized. He's effective. But that doesn't mean they like it.
He's got the same problem dealing with Gentiles as they had
Very good point.
with Jesus.
Very good point. Yeah. So you may find yourself in a situation where you're not going to be the one that is in every situation liked, but you can be the one who is constant, the one who folks know is going to serve the Lord and going to try to do what's right, and the one who learns to take the criticism when the criticism is helpful. Very good. Anything else? Got 2 minutes. Yes, sir.
I think, good listening to the prodigal son, when he came to himself, that's what happened to Nebuchadnezzar and all these other guys, they came to themselves
Yeah.
and they made the right decision. Some came to themselves and they said, well, I see this, but I'm not gonna do it anyhow.
Very good. Yeah, it kind of reminds us of every knee will bow. There'll come a time when everybody will acknowledge. It surely is best if we do it now. It works out better for everybody if we do it now. But it will happen eventually, and that's kind of what you see in Daniel. God's going to prove who he is. Some of these kings recognize it. Nebuchadnezzar recognizes it. Darius recognizes it. That doesn't totally change everything about them, but they seem to try to make some headway. Yes, sir.
Piggyback off that, that's what Daniel tells Belshazzar.
Yep.
You saw what happened to your dad,
Yep.
and you knew, and knowledge doesn't always equate into the right action. It didn't.
That's 5:22. He says, yet you, his son, have not humbled your heart, even though you knew all of this. Yeah, very good, very good. Okay, well, let's look forward to chapter 7 next week. I will ask you to go ahead and read chapter 7. I think it would probably be helpful for our discussion if you'd go ahead and read through it, and then we'll try to work our way through it. Thank you for participating.